our website and share on Facebook afterwards. So with that, I am very happy to introduce Joanna Wu. She is a GIS analyst and biologist for the National Audubon Society, and she is a very cool person. If she was a Disney heroine, she would be a warrior princess, like, I don't know, Raya or Merida, and I would be her best friend slash sidekick because she is fierce and intelligent and super awesome. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanna.
Wow, that introduction is going to be hopefully not too much more exciting than my talk, but thank you, Ariana, and thank you all for being here this evening. Today I'm going to be talking about female birds, and this, many of you may know, is the female belted kingfisher. The male doesn't have the rusty side patches. It's one of the few birds where the male is a little bit less colorful than the female. So, let's see. First, I'm going to be talking about why the focus on females specifically, then Female Bird Day and the Galbatross Project, a few identification tips, and then I'm going to be talking a little bit about female song. So first, why female birds? There's an article that I encourage all of you to read by the birder and field guide creator Ken Kaufman, who wrote "I Became a Better Birder When I Stopped Focusing on the Males," where he basically says that, in bird watching, there's a huge focus on males to the point that some people won't even put it on their list if they see a female. But then it's the females that often give you a birding challenge. So from that perspective alone, it's good to look out just not only for the colorful and bright males, because female warblers, a lot of them really do look the same, and it can be really tricky to tell them apart. Males, of course, are really well represented in photography and art. We're used to seeing like a flashy pink gorget of the Anna's hummingbird, and of course the typical kind of cardinal plumage. People are naturally drawn to red and bright colors, so males tend to be represented in these visuals. And then it's always fun to point out the exceptions. We have the red phalarope and redneck phalarope, where these are the breeding females, and their plumage is a lot brighter than the males during the breeding season. I've never had the opportunity to see them. I've only seen their non-breeding kind of dull plumage, which I don't believe you can tell the sexes apart, but it is one where the females can tend to be more aggressive, and they can compete for males, and they don't do a lot of the nest chick rearing duties. And also, I think for me as a scientist, a really important aspect of female birds is that females and males don't always use the same type of habitats, and overlooking female birds can have conservation implications. For example, this is the golden wing warbler, and this study found that on their overwintering grounds, golden wing warbler females lost twice as much habitat as males did, because females use lower elevation habitats in Central America that are more prone to logging than the higher elevation forests used by males. So this is an example of habitat segregation that has important conservation implications. And these authors further go on to find that only 8% of land bird conservation plans consider female birds separately from males, when in fact there may be a lot that we just don't know about females because we haven't considered them as being maybe different from males in habitat use. Another thing that I read about in my kind of research is that climate change may have implications for female birds that are different from males. Female birds tend to incubate more than males, and in burrow nesting birds, for example, storm events and sea level rise may disproportionately impact females that are sitting on the nest. So next, I want to talk about the Female Bird Day and the Galbatross Project. I am one of a few people that we call ourselves the Galbatrosses, established in 2019. And we are out basically to promote and appreciate the misunderstood and overlooked female birds. This kicked off with the Female Bird Day in 2019, where my colleagues went to compete in the World Series of Birding Championships in New Jersey, but they were only looking for female birds. We didn't do it last year due to COVID, but we were able to. We kind of did a little campaign on social media, asking people to look for female birds wherever they are locally, and it was a lot of fun. We learned a lot. So, who are we? We are a group of birders, scientists, writers, and conservationists. A lot of us are from the National Audubon Society, and we just banded together to raise awareness about female birds. And here are some of the identification tips that I learned from a variety of different resources, starting with from my colleagues to the birds of North America to digging deeper into the birds of the world. So there are, of course, different types of dimorphism that I want to briefly go over. Some birds, of course, are visibly dimorphic, like the adult male Brewer's blackbird is really different from the female. The house finch is different in how they look between the sexes, although it's hard to tell females apart from immatures. This is the example I mentioned earlier, that the female Delta kingfisher has a colorful orange band and the male lacks, which is kind of unusual in the birding world. This is true for both hairy and downy woodpeckers. If you look closely on the top of their head, the male has a red patch on his crown and the female doesn't. That's a fun one to look for because it's not something that we often think about, but it's pretty easy to see if you look carefully. And then this is kind of my favorite example of a bird that's vocally dimorphic. So wren tits, which you probably have in your backyards or open spaces, they sing a song kind of that sounds like a ping pong ball dropping. And in males, this starts out as a ball dropping and then it accelerates and ends in a trill. But in females, they only sound like a ball drop and they keep going da da da, and it kind of doesn't trill and accelerate at the end. I wasn't savvy enough to figure out how to embed sounds, but please go ahead and check it out in allaboutbirds.org. It's a really cool dimorphism that some researchers recently petitioned with Cornell to add the word female song specifically as opposed to just song. So you'll be seeing that more in the collection. There are also species that are behaviorally dimorphic. The chestnut-backed chickadee can't really be told apart by looks, but only the females incubate eggs and largely build nests too. So this is actually a nest from a yard that the female built, and I think she took a bunch of dog fur from our neighbor's dog. And then, so if you ever see it, if it's sitting on eggs in the nest box, for example, it's definitely a female. And then this is kind of arcane, but I recently learned that in some birds, the task of removing fecal sacs is not shared equally. In swallows, for example, like this tree swallow, only the females do this type of nest sanitation. So in swallows, if it's carrying a fecal sac, it's a female. But there's really not much known about this type of behavior yet as it differentiates between the sexes. So we're just kind of learning a lot in this realm. And you might be starting to realize that it's hard. We are not always gonna be able to ID birds. I was reading that mourning doves are sexually dimorphic, and I couldn't find a good picture, but the males have like a bluish crown, and sometimes they have blue on their necks, whereas the females are just a little more gray, but it's really subtle and really hard to tell apart. It might be easier to see when you see a pair together, in person than just searching online, but some traits are really subtle for sure. The northern fluker, I just learned this week, was sexually dimorphic as well. We've got the male on the left, which in the East Coast, the yellow shafted ones have a little black mustache extending below its bill. And in our part, the western areas, the male has a red kind of mustache. And if you see one that doesn't have a mustache, it's a female. So again, another really subtle thing that's fun to look for. The spotted towhee is another really hard one. I didn't know they were dimorphic when I first started birding, but the males are like jet black and females are a little bit browner. So tricky and not always 100% reliable. And then we've got birds like the California towhee that really just are not dimorphic. But the California towhees almost always hang out in pairs together and defend territories as a pair. So if you see two, you're likely seeing a pair of male and female. And so this is an Anna's hummingbird that is marked as female or immature. It is pretty much impossible to tell the sex of a female Anna's hummingbird apart from an immature. But one cool thing to note is that they basically breed from December through April or May. So if you're seeing one outside of that time frame and it looks like this, it's probably a female. And if you're seeing one during that time frame, it's going to be hard to tell if it's just an immature or a female. And Anna's is also one that where only the female builds nests and incubates. So if you are lucky enough to find a nest, it will be a female. The song sparrow is not dimorphic at all visually, but generally only the males sing. I think there are some instances where females do too, but very rarely do females sing. So speaking of which, I want to talk a little bit on female bird song, which is the last thing I'll kind of cover today. When I started birding, I did bird surveys, and I was taught that if you hear a bird singing, you can assume that his mate is nearby, and basically only females sing. I think that's something that we're told a lot, but it's actually not 100% true. As scientists study songs more, they're realizing that the prevalence of female bird song is higher than we thought previously. Basically, in the 27% of species where we have information about sex-specific song, 64% are species where the female song is present. So in 2/3 of the time, females do sing of the species that we know sex information on. This was kind of staggering to me, and it was it's definitely kind of changing the field of birdsong a little bit more in the recent years. So why do females sing? Well, it's for a lot of the same reasons that males sing. To communicate with each other, to defend territory, and there's also definitely aggression in females too, with other males and with other females. And they're in those same authors were studying some of the traits of birds where females sing, and found that it's kind of an ancestral trait, which means that historically, in the early kind of lineages of birds, we had more species where the females and males both sing. And then that trait seems to be lost in the New World, the Americas where we live. So as evolution continued on, it seemed that birds lost the ability for females to sing, and that it happened, kind of historically. It could be associated with being in the tropics, that typically more tropical birds have both sexes that sing, and we're just in a more temperate area, so we don't, we know less about female song in the US. It's also associated with pairs that hold year-round territories, which you can imagine, having territoriality, it's good for both sexes to sing and defend that. It's also associated with where sexes have similar roles among each other. For example, both sexes help to raise chicks and defend territories and carry food, etc. And then one study from Europe found that in species that are dimorphic based on carotenoid-based traits, which are like colors that tend to be red and orange. For example, house finches is a species that's dimorphic in a carotenoid-based way. They seem to find that in European species that have that kind of dimorphism, females sometimes sing. We're not sure why yet. So that's all of these theories are still being studied. So next, I want to transition a little bit to the 2021 Audubon Photography Awards. I imagine that some of you here are very good with your camera, and I'm just really excited to share that this year is the first year that we have a female bird prize at Audubon. It's actually a couple with the albatrosses and we noticed that in our photo collection at Audubon very few female birds, and they're very hard to find. And of course, in photography is one of the things where you can really find a strong male bias. So this year, we mentioned it to our art team, and they worked with the photo team and figured out that we could promote female birds by giving out this prize. So in my opinion, it would just be awesome to encourage photographers of really high calibers or amateurs to just go out and look for females themselves. That in itself, I think, is a really good step. So in conclusion, I'll summarize that not all females are just like males. Females don't always use the same habitat types. They don't always have the same behavior. So by assuming that females are like males, we can miss some important conservation implications. They definitely can sing for various reasons. And I just encourage you all to go out and birth the challenge to look for females in your normal day-to-day, and also look for juveniles and challenge yourself to see how you can tell them apart from each other. Thank you all for being with me tonight, and I will stop sharing. Or Ariana, I don't know if...
No, it's fine. Thanks, Joanna. I think we do have some time for questions. If people, you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask Joanna any questions you have. Well, I think they're all ready to join the albatrosses and help with the effort, Joanna. All right, well, if there are no questions. Oh, wait, here we go from Juan Pablo. Can you see the chat, Joanna?
Yeah.
And I can read it in case people are not seeing the chat. Juan Pablo asks, female species range differences. Which are the biggest differences?
I'm not 100% sure you mean like, is it like in terms of how they look, they range in differences, dimorphism, or of habitat? I think that's a really great question. I have searched for female and male differential use of habitat, and I could not find any information besides that one study I shared. So I think scientists we haven't studied them separately. We assume that where males and females are, they use the same habitat. And often that's true for the breeding season, but in the non-breeding season, they're just less studied and we don't know as much. So the biggest difference I know is that one lower higher.
Okay, and it seems like there's some feedback. I'm not sure. Rosalie, you want to go ahead and ask a question?
I thought maybe I lost the speaker in my ear. That's why I was making that gesture. But I did want to ask about Female Bird Day, which is actually 3 days, I guess, May 23rd to the 25th.
Yeah, last year we did that over Memorial Weekend, and I think we're gonna have a similar event that's just virtual, and we've been using Twitter as the platform to communicate with the public, and people can just participate from their own locations and use certain hashtags like Albatross Project or female birds, hashtag female birds, and just share with each other. It's mainly for like awareness and promoting, just looking out for female birds. It's not a particular competition or any list keeping. Yeah.
Thanks, Joanna. And then Julia put in the chat that she's observed in Western bluebirds that is mostly the females removing the fecal sacs. She's been a nest box monitor for 6 seasons so far. And Mateo asks, what is the hardest female bird to find in this area?
That's a good question. I don't really know. I'll have to think about that, and maybe I'll email Ariana. I don't know if I know the answer. What's the hardest one? Do others have thoughts?
Alan, do you want to answer that?
No, I had another question. I was Bewick's wren. I'm curious whether Bewick's wren remove the fecal sacs, because we've observed that in a nest box in our yard. There's one bird that just, you know, tosses or takes the sacs out, and I was thinking that probably might be the female bird. But I'm also interested if you could share links to those articles. They look kind of interesting. I'm not sure how to find them otherwise.
Yeah, I can.
Thanks.
Yeah, she can, Joanna can share them with me, and then let's see, I can put it in the newsletter or something, but yeah, we'll get those links shared. Another question from Jerry, as well as song, are there differences in their calls that are documented?
Yes, absolutely. And wrens are one of those sets of species where they have differences in calls because, you know, they don't always only sing, they have kind of complex calls. So I'll share that paper too that talks about the species that have dimorphic calls and songs.
Excellent. And then from Edgar, is there a noticeable difference in life expectancy between female and male, or does it vary species by species?
That's a great question. I don't think I know the answer. I think they're generally kind of similar, or females and conservative birds might be able to lift a little bit longer than the males who have kind of high testosterone and kind of are high risk, you know. But I don't think I've read much about that. So yeah.
More avenues for your future research, Joanna. All right, so I think that's probably everybody. I don't see anybody raising their hands or anything, but thank you so much, Joanna. This was wonderful. We all learned a lot from your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are going to go to board announcements, and I'm going to start with Rosalie, our social media chair.
Thank you, Ariana, and hi, everybody. This is the time of year when we have our annual election for the officers of the board of directors for our chapter. That would be the offices of president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. And of course, in the before times, we would hold these elections at live meetings. But last year and again this year, we're going to be sending out the ballot via an email that will go to all members. And that'll arrive in your inbox early next month, the first week of May. If you don't see it, please go look in your spam folder, because we really need everybody to send it back to us after they vote so that we have a quorum so that the election is valid. It's a very simple ballot. It's just 3 clicks. It's not anxiety producing like other elections you may have participated in recently. So please return that to us as soon as you get it. And we also always accept nominations and self-nominations for these offices from the floor. And so our virtual floor today is going to be the chat feature that Ariana mentioned. If you hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen, if you are a member and you see the word chat, if you click that, you get a little window that you can type in a person you'd like to nominate, as long as you do know that they are interested in serving. We don't want to blindside anybody. Or feel free to nominate yourself. Just please include some kind of contact information so we can get in touch with you about the ballot. An alternate way, if you don't want to use chat or it won't work for you, is to go to our website and use the Contact Us button under About Us. That's mountdiabloaudubon.org. Do About Us and then Contact Us, and all those emails come directly and privately to me. So that's another way that you could send that to me. Besides to myself, Rosalie Howarth, you could also send any nominations to the other members of the nominating committee, and that is Hugh Harvey, Carol Pachel, or myself. Now, the nominating committee has proposed a slate of candidates that will appear on the ballot. And interestingly, all of our incumbents have offered to run again this year. That would include Jerry Britton, volunteering again as president, Ariana Ricard, offering to run as vice president again, Steve Boofy, offering to continue as treasurer, and Carol Pachel staying on as secretary if elected. And of course, any other nominations will be included. So that slate will be on the ballot. Send me any nominations you may have, and look for your ballot early next month, first week of May. Make sure you find it. or search your spam filter and get it right back to us. The hard deadline is May 13th. So thanks very much for participating in our chapter election. It's our little exercise in grassroots democracy, and we appreciate your participation. Ariana?
Thanks, Rosalie. And now we're going to hear from Jerry Britton, our president. Let's see, where's Jerry? Did Jerry leave? Jerry left, and then Krista's going to talk about the photo contest.
I'm sorry. I'm
here
here,
you
but
go. Okay.
my internet just crapped out.
Oh, of course. Just when
Right,
you're
of
supposed
course,
to
right
talk.
when I'm sorry, but yeah, let me try to get going here. So I'm going to, hello everybody, and thanks for being here. I'm going to talk about our photo contest. Hopefully this won't happen again. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my desktop. Guess this. And I want to talk about our photo contest is ongoing right now. And so we're asking everybody to share your best bird photos with your fellow members, or share your worst ones. We're not picky. Okay, I know we've got a lot of photographers out there, and we have 6 categories. Here they are: bird families, birds eating, the worst bird photo. It's always going to be a nice one. Bird portrait, birds in action, any kind of action, I guess, it's fair game, and a humorous shot. And we also have a youth category, so that's actually 7. These categories, all you have to be is a member of Diablo Audubon. And the only other stipulation is, as of right now, we're only taking, please only submit photos of birds taken in California. We take any kind of photo. We have judges that are from our chapter, and also Bob Lewis, who's from Golden Gate Audubon, is judging the photos, and a husband and wife team of Kitty O'Neill and Bill Pelletier from Santa Clara Valley Audubon are also going to judge. They both run bird photography websites. And not that, we don't want to make that sound intimidating to you, but we're just asking that you get your photos in by May 14th, but sooner rather than later because of the processing time. So there's going to be 35 pictures to show at the June meeting and be published in the Quail. There's a good chance one of them or more will be yours, and also a chance to win $35, a gift certificate from Wild Birds Unlimited as a gift card for each of these categories. And so please, at your earliest convenience, send some photos and send them to our website, mountdiabloaudubon.org. If you type that in and you go right here, right, where's green right here, new 2021 photo contest, click on that, and it gives you all the what for about how to enter your photos right here. So you just read and do what it says, and that's all there is to it. I did mine a couple of weeks ago, and I hope we get a big turnout. So thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, please, everyone, submit your photos. Oh, question from Cheryl. How about adding a female bird category? What do you think, Krista and Rosalie? I think, Rosalie, you're on mute.
I got like shamefaced when I saw that in the presentation, like, why didn't we think of that? So I'll get together with Krista and we'll see if we have time to change the rules and add that category. This is the year to do it for sure.
All right, we got support for that idea from Alan. All right, now Hugh Harvey, where are you, Hugh? Are you here?
I'm right here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, take it away.
All right, I just want to say good evening to everybody. My big thing tonight is to remind everyone that on April 22nd, we celebrate Earth Day around the country. It's always on the 22nd. This year it happens to be on a Thursday. Usually the public celebrations are on the nearest Saturday, which is going to be the 24th. I have no idea if there are any public celebrations of Earth Day this year due to the pandemic, but I would just want to remind everyone to go out and go birding. There are lots of places which were mentioned in the quail, but don't limit yourself. Those are just mostly the places that we're going to be on our field trip had we had field trips this month. I want to say that it's all happening right now. Yesterday, there were almost 300 Western kingbirds past the Golden Gate. 70 on the west side of the bridge and over 200 on the east side. This is based on some birders from San Francisco being there to count and watch. Already in Heather Farm Park, starting a week ago, last Wednesday, I saw a male downy woodpecker starting to excavate a hole. He's in there pretty far right now. And Saturday morning and again this morning, I was able to watch copulation. X-rated, close your eyes. Anyway, with all of that, I just want to add one more footnote. I am barefoot tonight. Okay, thank you very much, and let's get on with our program.
Thank you, Hugh. Always lovely to see your bare feet. Okay, so now you already sort of started the sighting. So this is the time in the meeting where we share some exciting or even, it doesn't have to be that unusual, just something that made you happy. So tell us the species you saw, where you saw it, and the date. And if you don't want to unmute yourself and share, you could also put it in the chat. Does anybody want to share any sightings? Okay, Nina. Can you unmute yourself, Nina, or do you want to put it in the chat? Or Nina, did you accidentally raise your hand? Okay, how about Terry? Oh, okay, go ahead, Terry.
I dropped off at my sister-in-law's house today, and she is one of the people that take care of the Lindsay Museum. Okay, what are they called? The hummingbirds. She had 8 baby hummingbirds, and one has a broken leg, and she has to feed it every 25 minutes. And she has to, I guess they poop in their bed or whatever, so she has to like take the poop out with a Q-tip. Anyway, it was a thrill. She brings them fresh flowers. She's been doing this for years, and I just thought that was a thrill to see. She did say the difference between a male and female baby hummingbirds is a chevron is the white part on the baby tail, and the female has a white, like a triangle. But anyway, I don't think you normally see the babies, and they're pretty hard to spot unless they're at a feeder. So I'm not sure that's all that helpful, but it was a thrill for me to see that today.
That is so cool. I bet they were adorable. I mean, I wouldn't want to have to feed something every 25 minutes. My kids are 4 and 6, and I don't want to go back to that. But hey, your friend's doing fecal sac removal. Yay. Any other sightings that people want to share?
I'll say something.
Okay.
Yeah, this morning, in fact, almost the whole day long, I had a flock of pine siskins working the catkins on all the oaks that are blooming, or I guess you'd call it blooming, leafing out and on our property. And it was quite extraordinary, the amount of noise they make. And there must have been hundreds of them. And that was by far the loudest noise that was out there today. It was just all the pine siskins. It was quite extraordinary today.
Wow, that's very cool. Okay, and I see Urban. I'm not sure if people are waving at each other or they're waving because they want to speak. Paul, I think maybe you're saying you want to share a sighting. Okay. Let's see, Paul, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, we have an oak titmouse in our yard, and
Okay.
it's constantly singing from early morning to late at night. And I just hope the male, I assume it's the male looking for a female, but it's all day long, and he's so determined.
Oh,
Is
man.
that normal? I just wanted others, I'm curious.
I don't know. I mean, I've seen oak titmice, but I haven't heard them singing all day. Anybody have an answer to that question? Well, maybe someone will get back to us. Paul, did you have a sighting you wanted to share?
We do. Nancy and I were over at the Bodega Bay for the last couple of days, and the weather was lovely over there. I forgot all about spring break when I made the reservation. And there were a lot of people there. Let me put it that way. A lot of people having a good time. So that was nice to see. But anyway, out at Bodega Head, we did see nesting pelagic cormorants right there on the cliff face. So that was nice to see. And while we were out there, we got to see 5 California gray whales and a couple of bottlenose dolphins. So the bay was very lovely. Still a lot of winter migrants are there. They haven't started their flight back yet. Lots of brants, hundreds of brants. So anyway, we had a good time.
Wow, Paul, that sounds really exciting. How cool to see all those animals. Okay, Alan.
Yeah, Wendy and I went over to Morgan Territory yesterday and birded along the east side where the fire came up to the edge of the park. It was pretty interesting going down into the Manzanita on the Manzanita Trail and Valley View Trail, because the fire kind of burned right up, you know, on the eastern side of the Morgan Territory Ridge. We, you know, the birds weren't terribly active in the fire zone, but the plants were starting to look pretty interesting with huge globe lily straps and things like that. But when we walked back along the Prairie Falcon Trail, we had wonderful wren tits just almost coming right up to us, hermit thrush, no real spring migrants yet that we saw there, mostly, you know, expected wintering species, but just a beautiful day in Morgan Territory.
Thanks for sharing, Alan. I was talking to someone recently and they said that was their favorite park, and I haven't gone to it, I think because it's kind of far away, but she was saying since it is less accessible, you kind of get it to yourself. So it's on our list of places to visit. So we have some more in the chat. I was thrilled to see bluebirds while walking in Diablo Shadows area of Walnut Creek. I haven't seen many in my life, so very excited. From Hugh, vermilion flycatcher at Grant Park on the side of Mount Hamilton, eastern Phoebe in the Guadalupe River bed in San Jose. And from Steve Boofy, oh, an answer, yes. They also have an oak titmouse doing the same, calling all day, that Urban Randy shared with us. Oh, and Julia Starr, I saw many oak titmice at Valley Vista 10 days ago, and they were very vocal. From Jessica Craven, oh, great, she's a student watching in, wonderful. She saw a northern mockingbird land mate today, copulate, and began building a nest in the SFB. I was surprised at the sequence of events occurring so rapidly. Okay, sorry, I'm like kind of slow here with my scrolling. Maybe if I just hit this, that'll go. Okay, Prairie Falcon Trail in Morgan Territory is a good place to see soaring peregrines and also canyon wrens. All right. So I think that's probably enough for site. Oh, Terry Smith saw an oriole at my sister-in-law's house on her hummingbird feeder. Okay, so last call for the whole flock of cedar waxwings each day at our fountain. Any other sightings people want to share? Last call. All right, then we're going to turn to our main program this evening. We have Adélie penguins with Annie Schmidt. She is the Antarctica Program Director for Point Blue Conservation Science. She started at Point Blue in 2004 as an intern investigating Leach's storm petrel demography on the Oregon coast. In 2013, she completed a PhD in ecology at UC Davis, where she studied the changing influence of ocean conditions on seabird populations on the Farallones. And she just recently returned from her 8th season conducting research in Antarctica. So glad that she could make the time to speak to us. And I'm going to Antarctica in January 2022. I was supposed to go this year. Of course, you know what happened. But anyway, please join me in welcoming Annie. I'll turn it over to her.
Thanks, Ariana. And thank you for the invitation to come and share a little bit about our research in Antarctica. I'm always happy to talk about penguins. So yeah, and thanks everyone for being here. And I will start sharing my screen.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody else seems to be sharing their screen. So okay, great. You got it. Okay, thanks.
Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Uh-oh. Okay.
This always
We
happens,
got it?
right?
Yeah. No matter how many times you practice.
Yeah.
Okay. I think you should be seeing the title slide now.
No, I'm not. I don't know if you want to try. Let me see. I wonder if what if I try? Maybe,
Here we
yeah, okay,
go.
now we're back in your presentation. So let's see.
It looks like it's like duplicated somehow on mine.
Okay, well, now we can see your title slide. So it looks okay.
Okay.
Okay, great.
So if I go next slide.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
great.
Okay. So yes, coldest, driest, windiest. I use this phrase a lot because it describes all the extremes of Antarctica. So all of the things, the hardest things happen there. So it is a pretty harsh environment to try and do research in and to try and live in, as the penguins do. So for today, it's just kind of a general talk. I'm not going to go into a lot of specifics about the research. I'm going to highlight a few things, but kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about what we do about Adélie penguin ecology, and then hopefully that'll stimulate some questions and we can have a good amount of time for question and answer. So at the end of it, I hope you've learned a little bit about Adélie penguin ecology, the importance of the Ross Sea in particular, which is where our study is located, and how we do our study there, and then just a little bit of highlights of current research. Some of you probably know Point Blue, but Point Blue is founded as Point Reyes Bird Observatory in 1965. So it's a nonprofit that's been around for a long time now in the Bay Area. And we changed our name, I can't remember how long ago now, maybe 10 years ago now, to Point Blue to sort of reflect the more general nature of the work that we do now. It's more than just birds, but we do have birds at the core of a lot of what we do as well. There's about 160 staff working on projects from Alaska to Antarctica, and we're working to advance conservation of birds and other wildlife through science partnerships and outreach. And science is really at the core of everything that we do. This is a photo of Grant Ballard, who's our chief science officer in the field in Antarctica. He's also one of the lead PIs on our Adélie penguin research. The Antarctica program, well, Adélie penguin research at Point Blue in particular was started by David Ainley back in the 70s when he started doing his PhD there at the same study sites that we're currently working today. So we have some really long time series that started then, maybe not continuous the whole time. But then our current iteration of the really intensive work that we're doing now started in 1996. So we just finished our 25th season of continuous demographic study, which I'll get more into in a second. But I do need to acknowledge, if I can move my slides, the rest of our current principal investigators, which there's been many over the years. This is our current team, which is quite a large team, multi-institution team. And this isn't even including graduate students and field assistants. So a lot of people working on this project, and it encompasses a lot of different aspects of Adélie penguin ecology and Ross Sea ecosystem in general. Where is the Ross Sea? So this, the red box is covering more than the Ross Sea, but in the middle of that red box is the Ross Sea. This kind of like lighter lime color is the Ross ice shelf. So that's it's glacial ice, freshwater ice that's floating on top of the ocean. It's ice that's coming down off of the continent. And that's the largest ice shelf in the world. So it holds a lot of fresh water, which is potentially important for sea level rise should it start melting. And then, can you guys see my pointer?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so Ross Island where we work is located here where my pointer is. And what else was I gonna say about this? Okay, I think that's mostly it. I'm zooming in on our study site a little bit. So Ross Island is the location of McMurdo Station, the Red Star. That's the main US research hub in Antarctica. This black star up here is showing the location of Ross Island in the Ross Sea, just where I pointed out on the previous slide. This study started in 1996, as I mentioned, and it's an international collaboration with primarily Antarctica, New Zealand, studying 4 colonies in the Ross Sea that we call metapopulation. So there's some connectivity between all of these colonies. The US researchers, our program has mostly been focused on Cape Royds and Cape Crozier. So Cape Royds is on the west end of Ross Island here. And it's a small colony. It's the furthest south Adélie penguin colony in the world. So it's unique for that. It's also one of the first that was ever visited. So it has some historical significance. And then Cape Crozier, which is a very large colony on the eastern end of Ross Island. And those 2 colonies are about 60 miles apart. Cape Bird has been the main focus of the New Zealand team. And then we have done some work also at Beaufort Island, which is not in the picture, but it's a little bit further north. So all of those 4 colonies form the core of this demographic study. In this image, these are satellite images, and the polygons that are these little blobs are showing, the colored blobs are showing the areas where the penguins are actually nesting in the satellite image specifically. So yeah, Cape Crozier is about 300,000 pairs. It's one of the largest Adélie penguin colonies in the world, if not the largest. I wanted to just give you a little introduction to who is this character, the star of our show tonight. I really love this quote, which is from Apsley Cherry Garrard from The Worst Journey in the World, which was chronicling chronicling Scott's last expedition where he was trying to reach South Pole. And The Worst Journey in the World actually refers to the winter journey that Cherry took with a couple of his colleagues to Cape Crozier to try and collect emperor penguin eggs. But he has this quote about the Adélies, which is that they are extraordinarily like little children, these little people of the Antarctic world, either like children or like old men, full of their own importance. And I felt like that was a pretty apt description of them from my experience. So they sort of walk with their flippers out, which makes it seem like they're like friendly and they want to be picked up or something. So they seem childlike in that respect. But they kind of have their chest bumped out and they're very full of themselves. They're fearless and they're a little bit aggressive. So that's the star of our show tonight. I wanted to just show a little video that kind of goes through their breeding cycle at colony. So this is primarily describing the breeding cycle at the Ross Island colonies. It might be a little bit different on some of the other areas that are further north. So this is maybe a little bit specific, but Adélie penguins are one of only 2 species that breed only in Antarctica. So the other species is the emperor penguin. So they really are specific to Antarctica and well adapted to this harsh continent. Yes, we stopped. Okay, so this one. So yes, they're arriving at the colonies in late October, mid to late October, typically, and the male is arriving first. They're gathering a little bit of pebbles, they're establishing a territory, and then females arrive a little bit later, and they pair up pretty quickly, usually within about a week of arriving. The male and female are like plumage-wise are monomorphic, but there is a little bit of size dimorphism. So if you have a pair together, you can often tell that the male is a little bit bigger. So we do try and sex them that way by size primarily. They build their nests out of pebbles. So they need ice and snow-free land for their breeding colonies, which is pretty rare in Antarctica. So that's a big limiting factor for where you can find them. Generally, you only find ice and snow-free land where it's really windy. They typically lay 2 eggs, and they can successfully raise 2 chicks if it's a good season. And they both take turns building the nest, incubating the eggs, brooding the chicks. Chicks hatch after about 35 minutes. Really adorable little fluff balls. can't, they can't thermoregulate for the first couple of weeks.
Annie, I can't really hear you while the video's going.
Yeah, I'll turn the sound down. Does that help?
That
Can you
helps.
hear me better? Okay. All right. Yeah, so this is a pair that just came back to the nest, and they do this really specific mate greeting, is how they identify each other. So they call to each other for a while, and they establish that that's their current mate. They sometimes keep the same mate for multiple years, but they are not often forming long-term pair bonds. They will switch mates fairly regularly. And then the chicks, once they're about 2 weeks old, they can thermoregulate on their own, and their food demands also become pretty intense. So at that point, often both parents will leave to be able to bring back enough food to feed the chicks. And then they come back, they have these really comical behaviors where they have this feeding chase. So the chicks are chasing the parents around trying to get fed, and the parent is behaving like he doesn't want to feed the chicks, but you're sort of like, why did you come back if you didn't want to feed the chicks? But it seems that the purpose is actually to kind of draw their own chicks out of the crush and make sure that they're feeding their chicks, as well as make sure they can feed both of their chicks equally, and one isn't out competing the other. So that goes on for a while, and then eventually, in mid-February or so, the parents just stop coming back to the colony, and the chicks are then forced to leave and go out on their own. And they have to take this plunge, very courageous plunge, and learn how to swim and forage. Okay, I think I'm not watching the chat, so I guess you'll have to let me know if there's anything I should respond to.
Yeah, I think we can just wait till the end. Yeah, because they're coming in fast and furious, but I think it's better for you to just go through.
They are really dependent on sea ice. So this is like a critical factor in their life history. And they use it for a variety of things. So they will haul out and rest on ice for hours at a time in between foraging bouts. They will use it for protection from predators. They also are using it for foraging. So a lot of their prey is actually congregating underneath the ice. So it helps them forage more efficiently when there's ice around. What they're eating in the Ross Sea is primarily these two species, crystal krill and Antarctic silverfish. The crystal krill are a pretty small krill. And this is a little bit specific to the Ross Sea. So mostly Adélie colonies that are further north are relying a lot on Antarctic krill, which is a much larger species of krill. Like Antarctic krill might be as big as that silverfish there. So it's a little bit different in the Ross Sea in that regard. Their primary predators of the adults are leopard seals. They do get taken occasionally by killer whales, but it doesn't seem to be the killer whale's main target. And then nest predators are south polar skuas. Again, this in particular is very specific to Ross Sea. It's very depauperate species-wise. So just this one to worry about. Hopefully you can still see me. I saw my internet connection is unstable.
You just cut out for like 1 second, but then you came back.
Okay.
And if you want to turn off your video, like if that helps, that's fine too.
Okay, that might help. Yeah. Let's see. We'll stop the video for now. I just wanted to highlight a few potential conservation challenges. So in general, the Adélie penguin populations right now are very healthy. I think the last estimate was something like 7.5 million individuals around the continent. So that's a lot of birds. But there's certainly some areas for concern. So one is fishing. Fishing has become more of an issue around the continent and in the Ross Sea, although to a lesser extent. Further north, I think the main target is krill, Antarctic krill, but in the Ross Sea, they're fishing for toothfish, which is really a keystone species in the Ross Sea. So that's kind of an important one to try not to remove. Tourism is potentially an issue. It's growing every year, except for this year probably. But and it's essentially unregulated. So so there's not very good idea of what people are doing or how many people are visiting specific colonies. And there is some evidence that the colonies that get visited more frequently are declining. So that's something to potentially be concerned about. I think the last number I saw was there were about 50,000 visitors to Antarctica annually. So not a lot in terms of you know what a national park might see, but if they're all going to just a few colonies, that could be concerned. And then of course the big one, climate change. Although they seem to be like continent-wide doing pretty well at the moment, we're all a little bit worried about what's coming in the near term, the near and long term, given that they're so dependent on sea ice, and sea ice is pretty rapidly changing. Okay, so why study Adélie penguins in particular, aside from their adorable character? We really think of them as good indicator species because they occupy this sort of mid-trophic level niche. They're foraging on these critical species of krill and silverfish, which a lot of other species also depend on. So what their populations are doing can kind of tell us a lot about what those prey populations are doing and how that might affect the ecosystem more generally. And a good indicator species is one that is highly visible and that's like relatively easy to study, and Adélies are that. They fit that bill because they are seabirds. They come back to the same colony every year to breed, so we know where they're going to be, and we can predict where we need to be to study what's going on, and so that's one of the main reasons that we are interested in tracking what they're doing. They're also because of this dependence on sea ice again. Potentially a really good bellwether of climate change. So because they're dependent on this physical aspect of the environment that is very sensitive to warming, they can act as an early warning signal of changes that are coming or currently ongoing. This figure kind of illustrates that point by showing changes in the length of the sea ice season around the continent. So these red and yellow colors are indicating areas where the sea ice season is shortening. And then the blue colors are showing areas where it's lengthening. So you can see it's not uniform around the continent. And in fact, in the Ross Sea, it seems to have mostly been lengthening, although not so much lately. And then it does correlate pretty well with areas where the sea ice season has been growing or has been lengthening. The Adélie colonies are doing really well and stable or growing versus on the peninsula where the sea ice season has been shrinking, the Adélie colonies there have been tending to decline. And the sea ice season is basically like the number of days that the ocean is covered by, I believe it's like 15% ice. Okay, so why the Ross Sea in particular? Well, one of the reasons is that the Ross Sea is designated as the least impacted marine ecosystem on Earth. It's not completely unimpacted by human activities, but there's very little. So it allows us to try and answer some of these really fundamental questions in ecology that we have trouble doing elsewhere. So we're still trying to ask for a lot of species, trying to understand why they live where they live, or what role they play in the ecosystem exactly. How will climate change influence their populations, and what is required to sustain healthy populations? So in a lot of areas of the world, our ability to study these fundamental questions about other organisms is often hampered by human activities, because we've drastically altered the state of the system by what we're doing. So fishing is an example of that. But in the Ross Sea, there's very little. I mean, it's not zero, but it's very little relative to the rest of the world. So it can help provide this sort of base datum for normality. So a sort of natural laboratory where we can remove at least some of the effects of human dominance. It's also really important for global climate regulation. So this figure is showing color than NPP, which is net primary productivity. So it's showing basically the amount of phytoplankton blooming in the ocean. So warmer colors again are more phytoplankton. So you can think of those as hotspots of blooms. And so the Southern Ocean in general is not very productive, but the Ross Sea is the most productive area of the Southern Ocean. And what's interesting about the Ross Sea is that because the productivity happens in a very short window because of the limited sunlight in that short seasonal window, a lot of the phytoplankton actually doesn't get grazed. Like the grazers don't have time to eat it all, and it sinks down to the ocean floor. So it actually can remove carbon from the atmosphere. And that's what we call it, a carbon sink. So it accounts for about 28% of the total primary productivity of the Southern Ocean, and it can remove the carbon equivalent of about 10 million emissions from 10 million cars. So it's pretty significant. And one of the reasons why it's able to do that is basically it has this intact ecosystem. So just to get into the sort of nuts and bolts of how we do what we do. We start in the United States. We fly to New Zealand, to Christchurch, and we stage there for a couple of days, and then get on a military cargo aircraft to fly to Ross Island. This is what my little cartoon is showing. We're usually leaving the US in late October-ish and in the field until late January. So it's a 3 to 4 month season, depending on the year. We get dumped out on the ice this is a C-17 right in front of McMurdo Station. So this is McMurdo. This is the main US research hub. It's also the largest station in Antarctica. And it serves as a hub for a number of other international programs as well. New Zealand and Italy programs go through here, as well as supporting the South Pole Station. So it's a very busy place. Can be up to 900 people there in the summer. It's basically a small town. But we only stay there for a week or so, trying to get ourselves ready for the field. And then we are flown out to our field site by helicopter. And then we're basically there for the rest of the season. I'm gonna focus on Cape Crozier mostly. So revisiting our figure here, Cape Crozier is the very large colony on the eastern end of Ross Island. And it's large enough that it's visible from space. So you can see this is a satellite image. The light brown areas are showing the areas where the penguins are nesting. And then you can see this brown, like gray smudge out on the ice. And that's the emperor penguin colony. So there's an emperor penguin colony right nearby. And then these like crinkly ice fingers are the fingers of the Ross ice shelf that are wrapping around the island there. This is what it looks like from a little closer. And late in the season when the sea ice is gone. And zooming in more, so it looks the view from in the colony. There's a human for scale. It's a pretty impressive place. Well, this is our camp, which is a little hut that's been here for about 40 years. It's not very big. This is the outhouse on the front. And then buried in snow back here is a tent. This is a different view, a slightly less snowy day. So yeah, we have a hut that we use as our base camp, and it's a permanent hut, and it's heated and cozy and very comfortable, except it's small. So we sleep in tents. This is what it looks like inside the hut. little crowded, especially after we first arrive, which is what we had just done here. And then, yeah, once we've arrived and gotten ourselves all settled and put our tents up, then we start going down to the colony. And the backbone of the study is really this demographic study that's been going on for 25 years now. And a lot of the goal of this is establishing that baseline. So understanding what's the natural variability in the system and documenting individual variability so we can understand and control for that when we're trying to model the population. So what we do is we mark the individuals with this individually numbered flipper band. We put them on when they're chicks, so we know how old they are when they come back. And they pretty much do come back to their hatch colony, their natal colony. But it'll take them a few years to show up again. So typically they don't show up for at least 3 years, sometimes 5 or 6. So you have to be very patient. And they live to be 20-ish years. So to really get a whole sample of all the different ages, you have to do this study for a long time. So we just did our 25th season. We only are just now basically getting to the end of that first cohort. We had an individual in the colony this year that was banded in 1997. So we only just now basically have the full range of ages represented in our study. This is what it looks like when we're walking around the colony looking for those individuals. So this is a lot of our time is spent doing this. We're trying to find where those individuals are breeding and record their status, record where they are. We take a GPS point so we can map them. And we try and record what their sex is by looking at them paired with their mate. And we do that every year, year after year. And eventually we have this whole time series that can establish this baseline to compare to when unusual events happen, or if we're trying to understand the context of changes that are coming. This is us looking for a bird. We make maps. We make maps digitally now, but that was back in the days when we had paper maps. And yeah, it's a lot of looking through binoculars, trying to read those band numbers off the bands. So there's a lot of work that's gone into that part of the study, and a lot of work has been published from that. I think we're at like 200 plus papers now, not just on the demographic stuff, but in total. So obviously I can't cover all that. So I just wanted to highlight a couple briefly key findings. So because we were banding and looking for birds at all 4 colonies, we could look at movement rates between the colonies. And we found that they really don't move very often. It's about 1% of the on the annual basis are moving between the colonies and switching breeding locations. But they are flexible enough that if an iceberg comes in and blocks access to one of the colonies, like happened in the early 2000s, then more of them will move and start breeding at a different colony, which is good news for them. So they're not totally stuck in their location that they hatched from. Penguins at different colonies do have different survival and reproductive success. So the smallest colony, Cape Royds, has lower survival, but higher reproductive success. So there's some potential trade-offs there that we're still really trying to understand. They found that some individuals are higher quality than others, so they tend to live longer and produce more chicks. And some individuals just try year after year and they can't produce any chicks, or they just try once and they disappear. And then this is a really important one for us. This large Cape Crozier colony is growing faster than the other colonies. And it's growing faster than we had predicted was possible. So there's a lot of our current work is really trying to understand what is driving that exactly. One question or one possibility is it's something to do with what's going on in the winter. So we had some work from the 2000s that indicated that the penguins from the different colonies were wintering in different locations. So we started to follow up on that with another study, another larger scale study, and potentially trying to answer these kinds of questions. So how do changes in the winter sea ice affect their migration, their diving behavior, and their survival? And then how do these effects carry over onto their subsequent reproduction? So when they come back to the colony to breed again, how does what happened over the winter affect what they do the following season? And then how do winter sea ice and ocean conditions interact with those individual factors I mentioned? So age and the year they were born, a breeding experience or quality over multiple years of an individual's lifetime. So we approach this question by putting out these geolocating dive recorders. So these are basically a Fitbit for a penguin. It goes on their leg and it's a logging device, so it's not transmitting. So we have to retrieve it to get the data back. And it goes on their leg and it stays on their leg for a whole year until they come back to the colony and we can take it off. So we did a study over 3 years at the at Cape Royds and Cape Crozier. We deployed 403 devices and we had repeat deployments on some of the birds. So it wasn't 403 individuals, but that was the number of deployments. And most of them were on known age individuals. So those banded individuals, which gives us a lot of power to kind of correct for those individual factors that might be affecting, or learn about those individual factors that might be affecting where the penguins are going and their behavior over the winter. So these devices record light once per minute, temperature twice a minute, and pressure 60 times a minute, so once per second. So you can imagine that's a lot of data. This is an example of what it looks like from one individual. This is a whole year of data. The top panel in red is temperature. I think it's in tenths of degrees, so it looks a little funny that way. The middle panel is pressure, so this would be indicating diving. So the taller the bars are, the deeper the dive, and you can get some indication of how intense and frequent their dives were from that. And then the bottom panel is light, and the light is what gives us position. So the light and the clock together. So if we know time of sunset and time of sunrise and sunset and day length, then we can use that to get a rough estimate of latitude and longitude. And it's pretty good for a large scale movement. So it gets us within 50 kilometers or so of their actual position. But it's just a lot of data. So from those 3 years of deployments, we have 5.7 plus billion lines of data, which is requiring us to learn a lot of new skills about how to handle such large files. I wanted to show you a little animation of what the location looks like. So this is going to show tracks of individuals from Cape Royds in blue, and then Cape Crozier penguins will be yellow. And then there's going to be sea ice concentration shown in the background. So the sea ice concentration scale bar is shown on the right here. So closer to white is higher sea ice concentration. And this is going to start in like late February, which is the earliest that we can get positions, because that's the first time we get sunset at that latitude. You can see there's some very large unrealistic movements at some times of year, and that's when it gets near the equinox. So you can't really get accurate positions near the equinox using light only. So we're gonna have to do some filtering on that. Okay, so that was just to give you an idea of what it looks like. That's kind of early stages of what we're dealing with. Excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat now. We don't need to see that again. And then another big focus of our current work is trying to evaluate the conservation efforts that are ongoing in the Ross Sea. So because it is this relatively intact ecosystem, there is a lot of motivation to try and protect it and maintain it in that state. And so Grant led this paper 2011 that was evaluating the conservation importance of different areas of the Ross Sea, and basically showed that the entire Ross Sea was essentially a hotspot for mesopredators. So this is like the Ross Sea killer whale, which is a killer whale that forages primarily on fish. Crab-eater seals, wet-tail seals, emperor penguins, Adélie penguins. So all of those species were included in this model. And what this is showing, the right panel is showing the number of species in each cell. So darker colors indicate more species. And then the right panel is showing the conservation ranking. So darker colors indicate higher conservation ranking. You can see that it gets pretty dark over the whole Ross Sea. So this was part of the evidence that was used to provide a scientific basis to propose this Ross Sea marine protected area, which was proposed, I forget the year it was first proposed, but it took many, many years after being first proposed before it was finally adopted by CANLAR, which is the international body that manages the marine resources in Antarctica. And it was finally agreed to and implemented in 2017. So this is relatively new, but it is the largest marine protected area in the world. So it's pretty unique and is a pretty cool accomplishment that multiple countries were able to agree to this. So now we're trying to understand, what effect the protected area is having. So this dashed line here is basically showing the boundaries of the protected area, and within the gray areas, there's no fishing allowed. And then the special research zone, there is some very limited fishing for research purposes. So we used those penguin Fitbits to look at the combination of where the penguins were and what they were doing there, and we classified all their dives by dive type. So they have very specific profiles when they're foraging, which we were able to pick out from that 5.7 billion records. And we mapped where they were foraging throughout the winter. So this is kind of an overview shot of all of that data. This is all 3 years of data, basically all the data that we had from April to August. So trimmed out the times when we had inaccurate locations from the equinox. But what was really showing up is this hotspot of foraging in the eastern inside the MPA. But that is really what's happening in April. And April is just post-molt for the penguins. So they molt right after breeding. Mostly they're molting on the sea ice. And they're doing that in this eastern Ross Sea area. So this seems to be like potentially a really critical location for their post-molt recovery. And it is inside the boundaries of the MPA, so that's good news. It's already protected. But then you can see after April, they are moving much further north, and there's a large fraction of their diving and foraging is outside of the boundaries of the MPA. So there's some question there. Now we'll have to try and evaluate what impact the MPA is having, or what impact not having a protected zone in that area might be having. And then I want to highlight this newish project for us. As part of the MPA, where there's supposed to be a monitoring plan implemented, and Adélie penguins were identified as one of the key target species to monitor for effectiveness of the MPA. And what that means is we need to be able to assess their populations at a larger scale rather quickly. And at a fundamental level, like counting penguins is still really hard. So this is the Cape Royds colony, and it's a relatively small colony, so it actually is feasible to count that by hand from the ground, but we can't do that at Cape Crozier. It's just too big. We can't actually get accurate counts from the ground. So we started a project to try and do these surveys with drones. And this little video will tell you more about that.
The Ross Sea in Antarctica is the southernmost sea in the world. Its ecosystem is almost entirely free from human disturbance.
Sorry.
Every year between October and March, thousands of Adélie penguins build nests on the edge of the Ross Sea in Cape Royds and Cape Crozier. Although penguins spend most of their lives in the sea, these few months are crucial to maintaining a healthy population. The Cape Crozier colony is one of the largest Adélie penguin colonies in the world, with over 300,000 nesting pairs across nearly 2 kilometers of shoreline on Ross Island. Understanding how these populations are reacting to environmental changes is critical for long-term ecology and conservation. Unpiloted aerial vehicles, or drones, are being used for animal monitoring and population surveys. In principle, aerial surveys could be completed faster using automated UAVs compared to UAVs operated manually. But the extreme weather of the Antarctic presents unique challenges for the operation of automated UAVs. Below freezing temperatures severely affect battery life, and sudden high winds limit altitude. And because penguins move about in the colony and weather changes rapidly, speed is essential. Researchers at Stanford University and Point Blue Conservation Science created an algorithm that iteratively finds the most efficient paths for not one, but multiple UAVs to follow. The algorithm divides the survey area into a grid. It then finds a set of paths that move through each grid point at least once. It iterates, with each subsequent path shorter than the one before it, until it finds the most efficient set of feasible routes. The process is repeated for each section of the survey area, and the paths are transferred to the UAV flight control software. Orange areas mark no-fly zones, and yellow circles mark the location of pilots who could take remote manual control of the UAVs in case of an emergency. UAVs launch from the field camp and fly to the colony. They then decelerate and descend to take photos. Previous human-piloted UAV surveys took over 2 days to complete. Drones using this system surveyed the colony in only 3 hours. When they complete their routes, the UAVs return home. The UAVs take over 2,000 images each survey. These are stitched together to make a mosaic of the area. Access to accurate, large-scale data is vital to ongoing conservation and ecology efforts. Through fast and efficient aerial surveys, teams of automated UAVs can greatly simplify the data gathering process and speed up population analysis.
So that video was made by our collaborators at Stanford, who led the design of that algorithm and helped us implement the surveys in the first year. And we were really excited about how it all went. The drones are really a step up for censusing in terms of comparison to other methods. For example, our ground counts, we have to walk around the colony and get fairly close to the penguins to count them. And it does cause some disturbance versus the drones, the penguins at a certain height, they just don't even notice them. Even less so than the helicopter, which was the other more typical method of surveying the colonies, the large colonies anyway. So we'll be continuing that work. Another big part of that work is to develop basically an AI system to automatically count the penguins from the images, which is fairly far along. We're getting pretty good results from the model that we've got, which we're developing in collaboration with Conservation Metrics. So another collaborator I forgot to list. And then I just wanted to briefly highlight some updates from this past season. So We did deploy this year, despite COVID. We definitely had some severe restrictions. We had to do 3 weeks of quarantine before getting down to McMurdo in isolation in a hotel, which was not very fun. And the program, the US Antarctic program, really limited the number of people going down. So we were one of only 2 science teams that were allowed to go. So we're very fortunate that we were able to go in to begin with. And part of the reason that we were is because we have these time series that are going that are really valuable and kind of irreplaceable if you miss a year. So we were able to keep most of them going. We did have to reduce effort on some things. We didn't have a camp at Cape Royds, so we had to try and cover that colony by doing periodic day trips, which was definitely not as effective. But we were able to get a lot of this essential time series and keep those going. So that was, we're very happy and grateful that we had the opportunity to do that. Penguins had an okay year. It was pretty average. Wasn't stunning, but the numbers of pairs was pretty stable, and they had average numbers of chicks. So it was okay for them. And we were able to do the drone surveys also, which was great. We got even better images this year, so we're really excited about that. I just threw this in for the birding crowd. This was a little bit unusual this season. We had a pair of southern fulmars hanging out at the Cape Crozier colony, which I think is the first time that's ever happened. And they didn't breed, although we were hoping they would, but they were there for a good long while. So maybe next year, keep an eye out. And then our next phase, if we ever can get our full team down there again, is really going to be focusing on juvenile behavior. So we're going to start deploying transmitting devices on the juveniles as they're leaving the colony. So we can get and kind of open up that next black box of we have no idea where they are, what they're doing in those 2 years after we ban them, 2 or 3 years before we see them again. So we're hoping to start getting a little bit of insight into what they're doing. And with that, I'll thank my enormous team of collaborators and people that have contributed to this project over the years. Actually, I think this is just our current list, so there's many more over the years. And funding is just provided by National Science Foundation and NASA. And I'll stop there for questions.
Thank you so much, Annie. That was fabulous. And there have been so many questions in the chat. I don't even know what to do because I don't want to keep you here all night. And some of the questions were answered as you went. Okay. So I don't know. What do you think? Should we start with the chat, or should I just see everybody start over with your questions?
Yeah, I don't know what the best way. Maybe people can raise their hands if they still have burning questions.
Okay, let's see. Can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
Okay, Betty raised her hand. Betty, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Well, I was just interested in the living conditions, actually, how you heated the hut. Did you eat inside the hut, even if you were sleeping in the tents? How was everything heated? Or just
we have a propane heater, so the propane is flown out to us by helicopter, and it works very well. So it keeps the hut nice and warm, and we cook on a little camp stove. So we do all of that in the hut. Yeah.
So I wondered if if the hut could use a little solar panel for heating, or
it does. Yes, it does have solar panels.
Okay.
But it doesn't provide enough right at this point to heat. But we do all of our electricity is run off the solar.
Yeah, like Paul.
Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, question. Morphologically, is there an advantage to that white eye ring on the adults?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, there are other Antarctic species that don't have the white eye ring, but are very closely related.
It didn't look like the juveniles had the eye ring yet.
Right, they don't. Yeah, and they also they have a white chin also. So they molt into their full adult plumage in the second year.
Thank you.
And then Herb, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just always interested in why people do what they do. And so I'm just kind of interested, Annie, and how and why did you get in this type of work? I mean, it's fascinating. And
Yeah.
so why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? Well, oh gosh, I mean, how far back do I go? I think I always, as a kid, like I always loved being outside. And so I kind of just started with that. Like I wanted to do something outside. And I was trying, I tried a few different things to figure out what it was that I enjoyed doing. And I didn't land on this right away. I was a marine biology major in undergrad, and I definitely did not figure it out in undergrad. I finished college and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. But I had an experience where I worked on the Channel Islands in Southern California, and I thought that was pretty cool. I liked the combination of marine and terrestrial, the island ecosystem. So I started, so that's when why I started on the Leach's Storm Petrel project with Point Blues, because it was on an island. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I didn't know anything about birds. And I just totally fell in love with it, like the seabirds especially, because they're just these kind of little mysterious, super tough creatures. And I also kind of like the adventure of it a little bit. Like we were like swimming out to this island and setting up our mist nets and swimming back in the morning. And I thought that was, I felt pretty hardcore. So I thought that was cool. And so that kind of, I kind of got hooked on the seabird and island life from that experience, and just kind of followed that path since. And was not planning on studying penguins, but I took the opportunity when it came along, and I love it. So yeah.
Thanks. Let's see. Does anyone want to answer their question? Or, I'm sorry, want to ask their question? If not, I can start with the chat. You can just unmute yourself and ask a question if you want to. Okay, I'm going to read from the chat, and I'm going to start from the bottom and go up. So Julia said, great presentation. Thank you so much for your work. Then we have, oh gosh, it's so hard for me to scroll on this. Thank you, Annie, for the great talk. Rosalie says, I'm thankful for scientists who endure hardships, 3 weeks quarantine first to continue to gather irreplaceable data. Let's see. How did Point Blue get involved in the first place on Ross Island?
That was from David Ainley. So when this project started in 1996, he was at Point Blue at that time. So, it was Point Reyes Bird Observatory. And he wrote the initial grant to get funding from National Science Foundation to start the project.
Great. And how do penguins react to humans and drones in their environment?
They are mostly pretty tolerant. So compared to a lot of North American birds, they're very tolerant. So they don't really react to you until you get pretty close. And they won't like try and attack you until you're like right at their territory, and then they will. So they will defend their territory if you get in their space. But if they're not on a territory, like non-breeding birds, they're very curious. So they will follow you around the colony and kind of like nibble on your clothes and your gear. And it's pretty adorable, really. For the drones, it's kind of similar actually. So the drones, when they're in the air, they barely notice them. Occasionally they will like kind of look up and be like, oh, what's that thing? But they don't really seem to be disturbed by them. And then when they're on the ground, they will like walk up to them and try and check them out as well. So you have to be careful that when you're taking off and landing, that there's no penguins there, because they're not really afraid of them.
That's crazy. Okay, so let me see if I can scroll up here. I had it just a second ago. Okay. How is this research funded? Did you already answer that?
Yeah, National Science Foundation mostly. So it's work in Antarctica is a little bit unique in out of the research stations, because it has to be funded by the National Science Foundation. But as part of that award, when you get a grant from them, they also provide all the logistics support. So it's a pretty big deal.
Very cool. I see penguins walking in a single file. Is there a leader for the colony? If so, how is the leader determined?
Oh, that's a great question. I would love to know the answer to that.
It's a mystery. Okay, Alan, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I noticed that there was an emperor penguin colony nearby. Do the penguins, the different species, interact with each other? Do they eat the same food sources? And is water temperature changes with climate change? Are they going to threaten those food sources?
Yeah. So let's see. There was a number of questions. Yes, the species do interact. The emperors they have definitely different personalities. And maybe I anthropomorphizing a little bit, but their life cycle happens just on a very different pace than the Adélies. So they do everything much slower. They walk slower. They just like react slower, except when they're in the water. Then they're all very fast. But so the emperors don't seem to be that interested in the Adélies, but the Adélies are very curious. So they go to the emperor colony and they wander through it and they harass the chicks, and they're obnoxious selves. And then what was next?
The water temperature potentially changing the food source.
Yeah, it's a really good question. One, I mean, we don't know the answers. So it's one thing we are going to be looking at with our next phase. So we're going to be deploying devices on the penguins to use the penguins essentially as water column samplers. How the stratification is changing. So how much which is affected by how much melt is coming off the Ross ice shelf. And that seems to be really important in controlling productivity, the amount of phytoplankton that gets produced every year. And then also where the prey is. Temperature sort of indirectly. The temperature is involved in stratification as well.
What was the oldest one you found during your research?
Oh, abandoned in 1997, so that makes it someone else to do math.
What is your training for this awesome job?
Can't do. Well, I have 2 degrees. I have a degree in marine biology and a PhD in ecology. But I don't know that was the reason I got this job. I mean, so yeah, some of it for sure, but a lot of it was having a lot of experience in remote field camps. So I'd worked on the Farallones for a long time. PhD. And I had a lot of seabird experience. So they're very transferable skills. But we try and take a new person into the field with us every year. We weren't able to do it this year, and we probably won't be able to do it next year. But and for those interns, we don't require a lot of experience. So so we try and make sure that there's an opportunity there for people that don't already have the skills.
That's wonderful. Get the next generation ready. What is unique about the Adélie penguin compared to other penguins?
Boy, that's a big question. I mean, it's like the most obvious thing is they are the only one of only 2 species that is breeding only in Antarctica. So that they can go to, and they're not as dependent on the sea ice. So the emperors and the Adélies are really dependent on sea ice, and
they're adorable. I don't know.
They're
Maybe all
adorable.
penguins are adorable. What kind of feathers do they have?
Oh gosh. What kind of feathers? I don't, I don't know like how to classify. Their body feathers are not like any other bird. They look a lot more like hair. But they are, and then they have really thick down underneath their body feathers. But I can't remember how many different types of feathers they have. I know the emperor penguins have 13 types. That was my little trivia bit.
Oh, 13 types. It's wild.
Yeah, but yeah, obviously they don't have the same kind of like wing morphology that flying birds do. So they don't have like primaries or secondaries or stuff like that.
Ice question: is it normal to lose ice in some areas and grow in others? Have you seen that in the 25 years out there?
Can you say that again? I missed the first
Sorry.
part.
Is it normal to lose ice in some areas and grow in others? Have you seen that in the 25 years out there?
You're cutting out again. I think you said,
sorry,
is it normal to lose
just
ice and gain ice?
Yeah, whether the ice grows in some areas and shrinks in other areas.
Is it normal? I mean, there is certainly some amount of variability, which is part of what we're kind of trying to establish with the time series is what is considered normal versus what's being driven by some outside factor. We don't quantify ice ourselves specifically, so but I can tell you from my time there that we have seen some really unusual events. So a couple years ago, the ice, which is where the emperor penguins nest, that ice all blew out unusually early. And it took actually a bunch of the chicks with it.
Oh.
Hopefully you can still see me.
I heard you that it took out a bunch of the chicks. That's very sad. Okay, question about.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yeah. Maybe I'll turn off my video.
I'm gonna stop my video for a second.
Yeah, I'm turning mine off too. Okay, maybe this will be the last question because it's already 8:45. Do you guys utilize interns, undergrad volunteers to process all the data? Oh no, did I lose her? We might have lost her.
Ariana.
All right. Well, sorry, folks. I think we lost her, but you guys were so into the program and that was so great. And I loved all your questions and your engagement. And oh, there she's back.
I'm back. But you probably are wanting to wrap up anyway.
Well, we're fascinated, as you could tell. There's just so many questions. So it was just a question about processing data. If you use interns or grad students or something to help process all the data.
Oh yeah, we do. Yeah, we try and get as many people helping as possible.
And okay, here's the real last question. What is in the foot structure that allows them to stand up on the ice for so long?
Oh, yeah. Well, they have like many seabird species. They have what's called countercurrent heat. They're able to warm up and cool down warm up the blood that's coming back to the body and cool down the blood that goes to the feet so they don't have to lower their core temperature. I have never fully understood how that how their feet don't freeze though, even doing that. So the answer is I'm not really sure. It's kind of miraculous to me. But like the Adélie's they don't spend a lot of time like standing on their feet on the ice. If they're on the ice, they're usually laying down. If for a long time, they'll stand for short periods. But then the emperor penguins are the ones that are really like standing on the ice for weeks at a time. And they have these huge, like really thick pads on the bottom of their feet. So I think that helps to insulate their feet. Plus they tuck them up kind of inside their little brood pouch thing.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I mean, we obviously really loved your presentation, and I'm glad I got to hear it before I go to Antarctica. So the timing worked out for me. So thank you again. And I'm sure we'll be asking you back.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, maybe you could come to one of our meetings in
Yeah,
person.
no problem.
So thank you all for
Yeah,
joining us
that would
this
be nice.
evening. So our next meeting will be Thursday, May 6th. We have Ivan Phillipson. He's either going to talk about Uganda or Oaxaca, Mexico. I haven't decided what topic we're going to cover. But our birding information presentation will be Yes Nature to Neighborhoods, and they are an organization in Richmond that takes youth out into nature. So that's going to be fabulous. So anyway, have a good evening, and we'll see you next month.